This illustration deals with selective coordination. In accordance with NEC 620.62, exceptions 1 and 2. The purpose of change was to accept a revision and provide in the revision certain requirements. So a revision has been made that will aid in design, installation, maintenance, and enforcement by clarifying those situations where selective coordination is required and the means permitted to achieve compliance. The change from a single feeder to the same source clarifies that this section requires selective coordination for the entire system, not just the feeder level. The additional of device settings clarifies that device settings need to be available to ensure proper installation. The exceptions are added to clarify specific situations where selective coordination cannot be achieved. So that's a very important exception, and are exceptions that need to be looked at. Now, let's review first just the call-outs. This is kind of to serve as an aid to this section. But notice, let's look at the multiple disconnects at the left top side of the illustration. And it's titled Multiple Disconnecting Means Supplied by Same Source. Then you have to make sure that this section is complied with. And so we look at 620.52b as in boy and 620.62. And then to the right of the machine room, which is in part 8 to Article 620, we pick up the wiring for the control wiring to the right-hand side of the machine room, then at the top side. Now notice Article 620, Part 3, and 620.21a is an Apple 3, deals with such wiring. And then, of course, you have the motor controller rating and what's required there in 620.15. And then, of course, the supply conductors from the motor controller over to the motor that kind of regulates the lifting and lowering and so forth of the elevator. You go to 430.22, and where the authority having jurisdiction, and it works out, you could have a demand applied to those conductors by 430.22e and table 430.22e. Now, at this point, I think it'd be okay at this point to review the notes, and the notes tie right to this revision. Now, note 1, selective coordination for feeders should be selected by a licensed professional engineer or other qualified persons is outlined in 620.62. Now, selective coordination, you're really supposed to know what you're doing. So some states, counties, or cities will only allow, they amend this section, and they only allow a licensed professional engineer to do that. Now, if, and engineers know this, but if they read the code carefully, in some instances and examples, they may design the system and they're done. Other areas of the code may say that the engineer shall design and supervise the installation. Now, they got two jobs. And then in this case, this note 1, they have to be a licensed professional engineer with the state in which they perform the work. Now, note 2, the selection should be documented and made available to those authorized now to design, install, inspect, maintain, and operate the system. And of course, we find this requirement in 620.62. The note 3 talks again about selective coordination and shall not be required between transformer primary and secondary overcurrent devices. That used to be a problem where the plan check or the authority having jurisdiction call for that. Note 4 now, it talks about note 3 only applies where there is only one overcurrent device or set of overcurrent devices on the transformer's secondary. Keep that in mind. Note 3 and note 4 kind of go together for that rule. Note 5, selective coordination shall not be required for series overcurrent devices of the same rating. And that's where you'd have a number of overcurrent devices, and when they are in series, you lower the available short circuit current maybe at a given point on equipment and so forth. So to get a real handle on all this then, and really understand notes 1 through 4, it says C620.62, exceptions 1 and 2 for the above requirements, so that we understand what 1 through 5 is really speaking of. And then notice these notes in blue kind of highlight what the revision was provided and accepted for to provide this selective coordination where it can be provided. And don't forget the exceptions where it's not feasible to do this. Then you'd have to have an exception to let you do otherwise acceptable to the authority having jurisdiction.